So Dr. Emilie Socash is the founder and CEO of the Nonprofit Help Center, which she founded in 2018 after working in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years. She holds a master's in nonprofit management and a doctoral degree in organizational and leadership psychology. Her doctoral dissertation in organizational and leadership psychology was related to donor behavior. In 2021, her company launched the Merit Nonprofit Professional Development Platform, an online capacity building system that's designed just for nonprofit teams, which now supports nearly 400 nonprofits and the thousands of people that work for them nationwide. And all members of the Alliance have access to it at a discount. In her free time, Dr. Socash is an avid traveler, reader, and believer in the power of people to make great things happen. So without further ado, I will hand the screen over to her.
Thanks, Robin. And I always like hearing that introduction because it's like, hey, I did that. So I am so glad to be with the United Way of Rhode Island once again. This is part of our series of workshops and webinars that we're doing. And I'm happy to be with those of you who are here live. We're going to keep this pretty conversational. And then I'm also delighted that this will live on in the resources that Robin and her team distribute out. So if you're watching this on the recording, hello to you too. So as Robin mentioned, just a little bit about me. I wanted to make sure that I included a slide in our presentation, which you'll have access to after this. A little bit about me, which you just heard, but also the links, where to find me on LinkedIn, my company page, and our training platforms. I'm going to give you a little snapshot at the end of our time together into our nonprofit board member basics, which may be right up your alley. But first, let's talk about today's agenda. So today we are covering board leadership redefined, cultivating strong chairperson roles. And we're really going to get into the juicy and yummy aspects of leadership characteristics and relationship building with the exec. Now, we'll cover 3 key points, kind of in broad strokes. One, we're going to tackle what is the evolving role of the board chair in today's nonprofit. Then we will look at the key skills and traits for effective leadership in that role and supporting that role as a professional. And then finally, we'll get into some tools and tips for cultivating leadership and really supercharging that relationship between the chairperson and the exec. And that's where we're really going to have the rubber meet the road. So first, though, I want to ask, have any of you ever heard of the analogy of the architect and the gardener as it relates to, in this instance, board leadership? Does that sound familiar? No. Okay. So here's how it works. So some folks believe that a nonprofit and its professional leadership can be like an architect and design a course of action for a board chair that is really lockstep. There's lots of parameters, lots of structure to it, lots of bylaws, and lots of review of bylaws, position descriptions, and really explicit expectations. And from all of those structures, a chairperson will be successful in his or her role. So that's the architect belief. On the flip side of the coin, there's also another belief that is more of like a gardener approach, where we say, well, I'm going to, as a professional, as an executive director, I'm going to nurture and support the chair that I have and their unique characteristics and their unique talents. And I'm going to give them all of the resources necessary to shine in whatever way that they shine. So just like a gardener looks at the soil quality and how often the plants are getting watered and what their sun distribution is. Similarly, a gardener executive director or a gardener nonprofit will say, hey, I've got this chair who has really great connections in the community, and I'm going to nurture their ability to develop partnerships. Or maybe my next chair is really great for building board culture, and I'm going to nurture that. So for those who are live with me on the call today, do you think that there's one way that's better?
I see both being pretty driven.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, both have their merits, right? Dee Dee, did you have a thought on that?
Just I think that would be something that would be sort of potentially intuitive, I would say, on this side, the board chairs, sort of understanding of the makeup of their board. What is the best approach given maybe, what the organization is and what they represent and what their missions are and the makeup of your board itself. Like who are they? What are their specialties? What's their so I like from my point of view, I'd have to think about that. Which way do I what I feel is would work best for this particular group and
Mhm.
the way the organization's organized and their mission, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. So, in sum, what both of you said is, well, it depends,
Yeah.
right? And we really need to look at the complexities of what is our chair or our incoming chair like? What are their goals regarding their board service? What does our nonprofit need? Where are we at in our organizational development life cycle? What do we really need to lean into? What would be nice to lean into? Now, both of these lenses are important, and they're both going to come up during our conversation today. But I didn't invent this model or this motif. This actually comes from a book called The Architect and the Gardener. And it's all about parenting. And these are two different parenting styles. And it's kind of a funny lens to look at developing our board chairs or developing ourselves as board chairs. But it's really apropos because we do need to consider a controlled and structured instance in some regards. And we also do need to leverage what the strengths and characteristics are of each person that's around our board table. Now, when we look at the evolving role of the board chair, so over time, our board chairs have served different purposes, and we'll get in a little bit to the history of nonprofit board chairs as it relates to becoming a good one today. But in a nutshell, our board chairs really are tasked with facilitating the governance of the organization, bridging the gap between board and management, and ensuring accountability and building a functional board culture. Now, notice I didn't say a perfect board culture. That's definitely a tall order, but a functional board culture, one that works well for most, one that works well for the mission of the organization. Now, as we're thinking of the evolving role of the board chair, let's keep in mind that the term board chair or board chairperson or board chairman or board chairwoman, it came from the idea that centuries ago, social service organizations were starting up to really meet social needs, needs that weren't being met by social structures, particularly those of the government and those of the church. This is centuries ago. And these social service groups needed somebody to be the spokesperson, and so typically there was one person that was chosen, and they sat in a unique chair. Whether the chair had the location at the head of the table, whether the chair was a more comfy chair, it depended on the group. But that is the not very exciting origin of the term chairperson. It's the person who holds the chair, that one special chair. And as we approach today, uh, our nonprofit chairmanships, chairpersonships, really draw a lot now from more of a corporate governance sense and really looking to have that interplay with the professional management of the organization. So let's take a look at three questions. So, what has been the traditional role of a board chairperson, like your mother's chair? What are the modern expectations of this role? And what are some of the challenges that you, as chair folks, are facing today? So, from a traditional sense, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, we really looked to have our nonprofits have a chairperson who would facilitate meetings, would oversee the procedure like Robert's Rules of Order, hold the fiduciary duties very high alongside the other board members, kind of be the gold standard of our three fiduciary duties. And then also to be much more reactive. I remember even 15 years ago when I was an executive director, I had a board chair who just said, I'm here for you, which All execs want to hear that. I'm here for you. Just tell me what to do. Is there a fire that needs to be put out? What do you need help with? How can I fill that gap? And that was enough, but it wasn't very proactive. That's it. Proactive is much more modern. So today's chairpersons really, in the most functional nonprofits, are strategic partners alongside the executive director. They are looking to build that culture of accountability within the board. Accountability exists in a couple different ways, and I do a whole separate webinar on this, but just in a nutshell, we have impact accountability, which is where we as board members, we as professional leadership, we hold ourselves and our organization accountable to making an impact, to doing the thing that our mission says, to making the difference that our theory of change embraces. We also have implementation accountability, which is when we hold ourselves accountable for actually doing the work, working our plans. And those are two separate things. Sometimes we make an impact circuitously without having followed our plans. Sometimes we're really, really great about implementing and it doesn't actually achieve the impact that we were hoping. But both of those things work in concert, and the board chair can be a champion of both. We also today look to our board chairs to really drive collaboration internally around that board table, and then across the line into the management side of things, with working very closely with the executive director or the CEO. And then finally, to be an advocate and to be an ambassador, to step outside of the boardroom and to say, hey, this is my charity of choice. Hey, this is why I have a personal passion, to speak up for the organization and to tell others, hey, come on with me. This is a great place for you to put your energy and your resources. Now, today's chairs are not without their challenges, because I'll just go back one. This is a tall order. This is a significantly higher commitment than we saw 10 or 20 years ago in the chair role. And that comes with some challenges. So balancing the attention to governance versus operational oversight. So even though we as nonprofit professionals, we in the nonprofit sector, we are calling upon our board chairs to be more invested and to be more personally passionate about our work, we still want to be attentive that governance is on the board side, management is on the staff side. So there can be a little bit of a challenge in balancing those two and keeping kind of a permeable boundary between the two. Also, navigating complex board dynamics. In my graduate work, I did a fair bit of study and research on some of the motivations behind giving and behind volunteerism. Like, why do we give of ourselves? And generationally, there are some differences, and also just over the last few decades, we've seen that complex board dynamics can come up where we no longer have such an affinity towards the obligation of service. We have a lot of folks in the community who serve on a board, whether as a chair or as a board member, for different reasons other than it's the right thing to do. And this creates an extra layer of engagement for our board chairs to be the champions of. Board chairs are often also called upon to support conflict management processes. This is where sometimes those messy conversations come up. It can be as simple as a board member is not fulfilling their agreed upon commitment to attending and participating in board meetings. That's the simplest kind of messy conversation that happens. Sometimes our board chairs need to get involved with legal matters related to our nonprofit that are not pleasant. And sometimes our board chairs are also stepping in alongside any significant staff changes. Finally, tempering or activating personal passions for the good of the organization. So our board chairs, as the spokesperson, as the face of the organization alongside the exec, can sometimes when so personally passionate, they may have to really look to get in line with the most effective messaging for the mission. And sometimes we need to activate a little bit more. When we have a board chair or a board member who has a really great personal connection to the organization, but just needs a little bit of oomph on telling their story, that's where we really look to kind of tune up that personal activation around their passion. Now, successful board chairs and board chairs of effective nonprofits have some common skills and traits. So in short, when I work with, I do some coaching, when I work with executive directors, department heads on, how can you as professional staff best support and nurture the journey of your execs and of the board members who you work with, we really talk about focusing in on nurturing the skills that are strategic, that are future forward, that are focused on stability, decision making, and opportunity seeking. So there's a little bit of balance there, right? So opportunity seeking can be something that is a stretch, whereas stability can really be something that is kind of the opposite side of the coin of seeking new opportunities or trying new things. So some questions that we'll explore in this regard. So what are some of the key leadership traits that we see in effective board leadership? What are some of the skills that the exec can help you cultivate and nurture just to be more effective in your role? And what are some examples of exemplary board leadership? So on this one, so this is where I want our folks that are attending live with us, put your thinking cap on for just a moment. I'm going to run through these top 4, and I'm curious if there are any that come to mind for you that you feel are missing. So thinking caps on, think a little bit. The top 4 that I have seen consistently, reported, researched, and just anecdotally, are emotional intelligence, which is where that active listening and the empathy comes up. This is where we really look around the board table and we look to see other perspectives and to really hear what's being said and hear what's not being said. We also see strategic thinking is a fantastic leadership trait. This is where we really stay in that mission first mindset. So strategic thinking doesn't always mean that you as a chairperson or you together with your exec have all of the answers and all the strategy figured out, but rather that the chair knows the strategic questions to ask. We also see decisiveness, the ability to make tough calls, the ability to make quick and timely decisions that are still well thought out. That's a key quality. And then finally, the leadership trait of self-awareness with the desire to bring out the best in yourself and others. Now, I'm curious if either of you have any other leadership traits that feel like are worth making maybe the top 5 or 6. What do you think?
Effective communication. That's one of the things that I've seen, like looking at my prior job as director of operations. I'm a manager now, but every time I look for other operations like that level lead of exec is that one of the first things is effective communication. I think these 4 are great. I would put communication at 5 or 6 or even 7, but I feel like navigating, all the board's responsibilities, the co-chair's responsibility, your fellow co-chair, you got to be crisp with communication and able to really get your message across.
Gold star on that. I love that. Dee Dee, I see that you are off of mute. What do you think?
Well, I think I find that and I think we've looked at this in other webinars, whatever, that just really engaging the board members in a strategic and thoughtful way to kind of get them active in all different levels, whether it's fundraising, just finding, doing governance, or, looking for new board members, just really being active in making a strong board, creating a strong board. So that's something I think is really important.
And I like that you brought that out too, because that is a leadership skill that is unique to the board chair. There are maybe it's even shared a little bit with the executive committee, but it is pretty much in the lap of the chair and of the executive director to really have that other focus. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Now let's take a look at some of the core skills that we see cultivated. So difference between leadership and skills. So leadership traits, those are things that can be developed in a certain self-reflective way. The core skills that we look to, these are things that can be learned in a more practical sense. The types of things you might be able to read a book on, apply, kind of do like sandbox sessions. So the four that come up time and time again are facilitation. That's right in line with what Cody shared about clear communication. This is leading productive board meetings. Now, we're going to come back to the idea of productive board meetings in one of the tips and tricks, but I will get on my soapbox and say that I've been in several board meetings. I've been in several hundred board meetings, maybe even into the thousands. And one of the ways that one of the things that is the least productive thing that we can do in a board meeting is to read reports and to inform the board on things that are not immediately actionable or things that do not require discussion or decision. And so the board chair can really lean into the skill of facilitation to keep those communications crisp, but really in that lens of a productive, effective board meeting. Conflict management. This is something that I love getting into. I don't particularly love conflict in my own life, but I do love the idea that there is such a thing as healthy conflict among the board. We can navigate disagreements constructively. Having a diversity of thought around our board table is healthy. It should be encouraged because that's where growth starts to happen. And that's where we start to discover opportunities. Mentorship. So this is something that the board chair can share with others, coaching other board members to grow in their roles. This can be also shared with, could be other executive committee members. It could be board long timers. You know, that person that's been the finance chair for the last 4 years. They may have a lot to add from a mentorship perspective. And then finally, vision setting. This is a partner skill to work out with the exec to align on the strategic goals. So as chairs, your vision for the organization and how it's fulfilling its mission is critical. It's critical, though, that it be in parallel with the professional staff who will be with the organization for a long time as well. And when those two come together, the sum of the two is greater than the whole, greater than the sum of, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's where I was going. Cody's giving me the nod, like, she got it. Yes.
Yeah,
So,
you know, any cheesy things in my professional career, I've named Project Aristotle and given that
there you
that
go.
thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so anytime for the rest of our time together, the next half hour, anytime that I'm stumbling on an analogy or a proverb, I'm just going to hand the mic over to Cody. So there you go. You've been voluntold. Okay, so a couple examples of some amazing board chairs. Now, these are kind of a bigger footprint, but I think that they're pretty inspirational. I just wanted to share these with you. Have any of you heard of Shirley Franklin, Jack Leslie, or Leslie Jacobs? I'm going to think no, because I hadn't heard of
No.
them. I started researching. Yeah. So these folks, so Shirley Franklin, she actually was the former mayor of Atlanta. So she's kind of a big deal, but she is the, I think she recently stepped into the CEO role, but this relates to her service as board chair. So she was the board chair for Purpose-Built Communities. This is an organization that is all about breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty. And she really partnered with the former CEO to really guide this organization into not just making an impact right in Atlanta, but into replicating their model to communities across the nation and to really doing these cool partnerships that could increase their impact. And she really kind of gets together with that CEO celebrate that that was part of her vision and part of her energy that she put into the organization. She wasn't satisfied with status quo. She's like, we can do so much more. Jack Leslie, his role as chair had him taking their work from very effective, very focused on the United States into a global perspective and going beyond AIDS and HIV research to do work in other life-saving ventures around medical, like pediatric medical issues. And so he really gets the gold star for taking their work globally. And then Leslie Jacobs, she's a really interesting character because she had the vision to start this organization, the Youth Force of New Orleans. And her role was both founder and board chair. And also, she really saw that, hey, you know, one of the things I can best bring to this thing I'm passionate about is community collaboration. We cannot be effective or functional in this if we don't really bring together all the players that are in our community and supporting. So Youth Force is all about economic prosperity for the young people of New Orleans. And so she really had this strategic vision that was bigger than herself. And I think there are three really nice examples that each have a little seed that we can apply to our own. So we're going to now jump in on 6 practical tools and tips. So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we can look at, as board chairs and as executive directors and key staff that are supporting our board chairs, we're going to look at the what that we do and the how of what we do. So it's like how we do it and what we're doing. So first we're going to run through these 3 and then we're going to run through these 3. So first things first, I said that we were going to come back to functional board meetings, right? And effective board meetings. So one of the greatest things that a board chair can look to do together with their exec is to create a strategy for running effective meetings. Why? Why is this number 1 on the list? Well, when we create this strategy, we are focusing on a regularity of this is how we do things. It maximizes our time usage in the boardroom as well as out of the boardroom, and it eliminates recreating the wheel. So every month or every other month, whatever the cadence of your board meetings is, our board chairs should feel that they have good support in, okay, so we talk about the board agenda, me and the exec, we bring it to the executive committee, they review it, we have the agenda for the meeting, we've really outlined who does what and how our time is spent. We need to have a regularity of that strategy so that we are being efficient with our energy and our time. Now, we do this in 3 ways. So first thing we do is we design a purpose-driven agenda. So before each meeting, this is where our chairs and our execs get together and they identify what is the objective of this next board meeting. The objective should not be, we're going to have a board meeting because our bylaws require us to have 10 meetings a year. No, the objective should be that we're focusing on our strategic priorities. We're including in a written report any of that operational minutia. And most importantly, we are allocating the time in the meeting for each item that needs to be discussed. So we know, okay, we're allowing 10 minutes to discuss this potential partnership opportunity. We're allowing 5 minutes for this. And then we have this one cantankerous element. We're going to allow 20 minutes for that. Keeping ourselves on track. That is where we really can get a purpose-driven agenda. Sometimes a purpose-driven agenda is as simple as reminding everybody at the outset of the meeting with a mission moment or just the mission statement of your organization. That can really also help us ground in the purpose of why we're getting together. Secondly, establishing some ground rules, including those that support balanced participation. So a highly productive meeting, an effective meeting, really has the culture of the organization or the culture of the board behind it. So balanced participation typically means adopting things, some of it is kind of school days sorts of things, but adopting principles like one person is speaking at once, or calling folks out. I've heard a lot from you. Let's make sure that we're hearing from some other folks, or even inviting those to participate. And then adopting a decision-making process. So while it's often common to feel like every decision that we make as board members and as chairs that we facilitate, uh, every decision is unique. It's actually not the case. Decision making is typically a pretty uniform and kind of rinse and repeat sort of a thing. So adopting a decision making process for the bulk of decisions can be something that really keeps you on target, on mission, and having an effective use of time. Do either of you have any best practices around this, or anything that you feel you'd love to share or get curious about?
Well, specifically, I like to sort of get to a place where we say, okay, what are the action steps now? What is it that we're going to do, and who's going to do that? And so that's sort of a simplistic way of looking at it. So I'd be curious about some kind of different, specific processes that might be really applicable.
That's a great question, Dee Dee. And one thing that I've seen that some organizations do, and it kind of depends on who takes on what type of functional role within within a board meeting's time. Sometimes it can be the exec, sometimes it can be the board secretary, or just it's kind of an after item that's circulated. But a chart of who will do what by when is a favorite tool that addresses that. That
Right.
can be used it could chart, vote decisions. It can be used to chart, okay, we decided that we're going to research the value of this property before we're going to even contemplate taking a tour of it. If you're looking to acquire a new property, or we're going to do this sort of research on this population we think that we want to serve, before we do this. So who will do what by when? And that can really clarify. And also it's a super compact way of doing meeting follow-up and kind of meeting recap at the end. That's one tool I've seen that's super simple and super effective.
Right.
Now let's take a look at our second tip, which is implementing an onboarding and support process. So as a chair and in partnership with the exec, you do have the responsibility of encouraging a really positive experience for new board members and for the continuing board members. And part of that is an effective onboarding. This does a couple things. It really gets folks feeling like they're part of the team, but it also accelerates the ability of each board member to meaningfully contribute to the organization. When we have engagement that starts from whatever we consider day one is, we really see that that's a good investment in long-term engagement. I've worked with some organizations where their board, let's say they have a July 1 fiscal year start, and their first board meeting is in August, and then they have a board orientation in late September, and then they have another board meeting in late October. That means that the first quarter plus of the year, newer board members are typically feeling like, I said that I would serve and I'm not sure what I'm doing. So early and often touches are really great for board members. And as a chair, you can be a champion of that. So how do we do that? We develop a comprehensive plan, which does include mentorship. Board buddies are a great way to have that happen. So a board buddy or a mentorship program can look a couple different ways. One is that you can have seasoned board members be a first-year buddy for a new board member. You can also just have board accountability partners where you have folks, regardless of newness or not newness, folks can pair up and can say, hey, like, we're board buddies this year. So Dee Dee and I, we're going to, of course, encourage each other to attend and participate and prepare for our board meetings. But just in case one of us needs to miss something, we can connect after the fact. We can kind of, be that person that you get the homework from when you miss a day of school. We often see that those partnerships often really build great engagement. We also want to conduct regular check-ins. So it is so meaningful when a chair throughout the course of the year will check in individually with board members to say, hey, how's this going for you? Do you like what you're doing? Do you have interests beyond the current committee that you're on? Do you ever see yourself as being a board chair? Do you ever see yourself doing a little bit more with the organization? Those check-ins, that 15-minute conversation or the 45-minute cup of coffee, those are very impactful. And then finally, we want to create opportunities for early wins. And I included this for two reasons. One is for our executive directors who are watching this as a recording, it's great to create opportunities for your chairs for early wins. An early win could be participating in a a donor conversation that maybe they were a little bit tenuous about. It could be just a kind of a refashioned way to approach board meetings, anything that really engages board chairs, particularly new board chairs. Now, as speaking to my board chairs, opportunities for early wins could look like doing something that really engages newer board members or the board as a whole right when you're early in your service. Now let's look at this third one. This is still in the what category. We want to engage in leveraging committees, and that can be part of that early win. It can be part of that building the board culture. Committees are where a lot of the organizational work gets done. You as chairs are not responsible for doing all of the work of the organization. Committees are great for that. And your role as head cheerleader, as steward, as nurturing supporter is critical. And so our committees also prove over time, and I'm sure that both of you have seen this, this is a great way to nurture that leadership pipeline. So whoever is going to be the you of tomorrow, they typically come from the committees. So how do we really leverage committees in order to make a great chair experience? Well, so aligning committees with strategic goals, that's a great way to do it. Assigning the right people. This could be professional staff to oversee the committee work. And then also it could be whichever board members are most appropriate to chair a committee. That also kind of as a side note, a side benefit, committee chairmanship is a great way to test out in a micro sense the leadership skills of somebody and to see, do they have the abilities or kind of the natural tendencies towards continued leadership, or is it something we want to continue to work with them on? And then finally, empowering committees with decision-making authority. That's a great way to balance the mental energies that you as the chair or the chair exec partnership really bears. Now, I've covered three of the whats. I covered creating strategy for running effective meetings, really leaning into our committees and implementing an engaging onboarding process. Any comments or curiosities from you on these? Anything strike a chord?
One thing that I've noticed in listening to those three, I think you were calling them what's with the why, how, is like operationally, like I always refer to these as point of failures, like where things can get stopped. So like your last point about committees, either through bylaw or just like, hey, you can make the decision, empowering them to make the decision, that avoids a point of failure or a point of rest to where, hey, we're thinking of doing this thing. Co-chair, do you agree? Yeah, go do it. Or vice versa. So it's nice,
Exactly.
like seeing these things that I've done at work or tried to do at work in kind of the board executive director relationship.
Mm-hmm. And Cody, I'm glad that you brought that up because, and we won't go too deep into it because it's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but something along those lines, that's relevant is the dynamic between power and authority. So power is often carried with the person, and authority is carried with the position. And so when we empower someone who is, and I'm going to do heavy air quotes here, just a committee chair, when we empower that person to have the authority to make a decision, we typically find that there's higher engagement. We typically find that there's more efficient and effective processes happening within the board and within the nonprofit, and that person is just having a great experience. But there is that balance between power and authority. Dee Dee, any curiosities around this before we charge ahead into our how tips and tricks?
No, I think this sounds very familiar to me. We have committees and we're always kind of reevaluating the committees. And if we start a new one, yes, the question can be who's going to be the chair of that committee. That can be challenging, getting people to step up and, owning, something. It's a mixture of getting the board members involved and also sort of delegating and being able to move things. Not everything has to land on the executive director, the committees can support her or him. So yeah, so I relate to this. I think it's a really, really important part of the organization.
It's speaking your language, I can tell. Now let's look at let's look at 3 of the hows, right? Those were kind of the what sorts of things. Let's look at the how we go about really leaning into the board chair role and really elevating it. So first of this cluster, building a strong relationship with the exec. Now, this does seem like it should be a given, but it does bear repeating because balance in this relationship really brings out the best that our functional governance has to offer, and it brings out the best in the management professional side of the organization. How many times have we heard a board member, it has to happen several times a year, we've heard a board member say, I just really think that we should run this organization more like a business. So part of that statement comes from a strong relationship existing between primarily the chair and the exec. The board and the exec, sure, but the chair and the exec, that's really the marriage that we look for. Even when your term is 2 years, sometimes 3, that relationship is critical. And a couple highlights on how we do that. So, of course, establishing a regular communications cadence, whether it's we talk every other week or we talk every other day. It doesn't matter what the cadence is that works for both of you. Sitting down and discussing how often should we be communicating and what should that form be. That will keep everybody's minds at ease. Also, fostering the partnership mindset. So even though the executive director does report to the board and communicates most actively with the chair, a partnership really does exist because chairmanships are term limited and executive directorships are not. And so really looking to partner on an ongoing overtime mindset is really, really effective. And then finally, a note about feedback. This is something that I'm particularly passionate about myself, and I love working with nonprofits, with execs and board members on what effective, constructive feedback really looks like. It is timely, it is actionable, it's objective, and it's specific. So I can describe a lot of things, I'm sure as we all can, of what does not what does not constitute constructive feedback, but really I will give you one lens on what it does look like when it is constructive. So it's in the moment. It doesn't have to be during a board meeting, but it's immediately following an event that warrants feedback. It's something that can be changed. It is or improved upon. It's objective in that it is not filtered by emotion or opinion or anything that comes from, well, a few of the board members are saying. No, it really does need to be objective, kind of almost that you could quantify it, and then specific, not, I said I wasn't going to say the nots, but it's really specific in that it's when this happened, this is really what should have happened. So constructive feedback, critical to that relationship. Performing a self-assessment. Now, this is something that actually is kind of an unusual practice, but it is something that I do encourage for today's contemporary modern board chair. Now, when I say self-assessment, I mean the board chair. So most of our organizations understand the need and typically activate around a board assessment, reflecting on the board's success and learning edges and areas where you're functioning effectively. Typically, the executive director does some sort of a self-assessment on a regular pace. Often it's annually, sometimes a little bit more, often a little bit less. But really having the board chair also do a self-assessment because of the importance of that relationship. It can be like almost like the third leg of a stool in understanding where leadership can go with the organization. So I do suggest using a structured evaluation tool that is regular over time, consistent over time. I do suggest facilitating an open discussion with the exec and the executive committee. So every executive director or CEO expects to do, or it is expected to do, some sort of an annual performance evaluation. That's pretty typical. A portion of that conversation, or something that can happen kind of near that conversation, is also a similar conversation between the exec and the board chair to say, hey, as a board chair, I need more of this from you, or I need less of this from you, or I really appreciate the way that you handled this type of thing that we did together this year. That two-way conversation, it's really clutch for keeping that relationship very healthy and very effective. And then finally, developing some goals and enhancement plans for your own leadership as a chair that align with the mission of the organization can be a meaningful, a fun, and also a purposeful exercise to do. These goals might be something that you want to work on personally as a leader. We're all on a leadership journey, regardless of where we're at in life. It could be something that you just want to really kind of be remembered for. What will be your legacy of board service? Is it something operational? Is it something around board culture? Those are great things to discuss with your exec. And then finally, encouraging a culture of inquiry. So this is where we get curious and we encourage others to also be curious. So as leadership of the organization, particularly in the chair role and in the exec role, we are in and through the organization's everyday activities pretty frequently. And so it's easy to feel like a lot of people or everybody has the same depth of knowledge that we do, but really leaning into that inquiry-oriented perspective, it really helps keep the organization mission focused. The board members are feeling that there's a more collaborative environment, and it really does build up your decision-making capacity. So what this looks like is open-ended discussions. So even though you may have talked it through with the exec every which way, but really facilitating open-ended discussions on matters of importance and empowering all voices. So sometimes that looks like surveys. Sometimes it looks like going around the table just to make sure that some of the folks who aren't as prone to speaking up really have a voice in all matters. And then using reflective practices. So reflective practices, this is one of my favorite exercises to do within a board meeting. It doesn't have to be done in every board meeting, but when we have something that is meaty that we're discussing, taking a moment after the discussion has happened or after the decision has been made and to say, hey, how did we do in discussing that? Or are we asking the right questions? Or as we had that discussion, I noticed that there might have been a few heated moments. What really came up for folks? Those sorts of reflective practices continue to loop back and improve the way that our board functions. So now I want to take 60 seconds and ask, are there any curiosities or things that you want to kind of lean into on those three? They were encouraging a culture of inquiry, performing a board chair self-assessment, and building a strong relationship with the exec. Any little curiosities or comments on those three?
It
And
just makes me think about, usually on our agenda, there can be this open discussion, thing at the end, which to me always feels like a little vague. It's sort of, so it could be used for that, actual function. Like, let's talk about what we just all talked about. Like, or, are we
exactly.
feeling good about the way we communicate and the way the decisions we're making? Does someone have any thoughts about that? Like, yeah. So that could be really being mindful about that open discussion though, as a board chair. Like, let's get that conversation going. So
I love that so much. And, you hit on a couple things, you can give the conversation, the open discussion conversation, a little bit of shape to say, how do we do on decision making? How do we do on our communication and discussion? How do we do about giving everybody a voice? You can kind of direct it to whatever you feel is right for your group. Yeah, you can definitely do that. And the first time there will be, I have a prediction, getting out my crystal ball. There will be a very pregnant pause, because when if your group, if your board is not accustomed, and I don't want to predict that they are or are not, but when they're not accustomed to being asked a reflective question, it can be a little surprising. And so there will be a very pregnant pause. Just stick with it. Just wait it out.
yeah.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
they will warm up, and they will, I'm 95%, you'll have to let me know, but 95%, they will love it, and they will engage openly with it once they get the
Yeah. Yes, I get that. Okay, great.
hang. Now we have just a couple more minutes. I want to highlight one thing for both of you, and then we'll stop the recording. And if there are any off-camera questions that you want to continue to pester at. So that's a recap of what we did today. I wanted to open it up for Q&A, but also I wanted to just give you your eyes on something that you may enjoy. Robin mentioned this at the outset, that we are partners with the United Way Rhode Island on offering a range of our courses to the membership at a discounted rate. So one of the courses that we do offer is Nonprofit Board Member Basics. And this is a course that's designed for either you as an individual or your full board. We have a full board price. We cover 9 different topics. These include board member duties, setting expectations, governance versus management. We also cover the executive director relationship, which we talked about a little bit today, bringing the mission to life, what board member engagement looks like, also diversity in the nonprofit boardroom, constructive conflict and change management, one of my favorite topics, and then leadership styles. And so just FYI, you get 10% off if you decide to do that, and it supports the United Way of Rhode Island. So you will be getting the deck, and you will see the link to that if you want to check it out. So I'd now like to open it up. We have 2 or 3 more minutes, and maybe Robin, if you could stop our recording.